The problem here is that if you look at why the disparity between homeless men and women is so large, you'll realize that even though men are more likely to experience homelessness, they don't have it the worst. All of the arguments brought up by Spetsnaz are—
Really? They don't have it the worst?
Yeah!
Alright. I'm going to bypass this because I've watched it already, and he just gives this bullshit about women getting raped, which I don't believe.
Literally as I'm about to show my arguments, yeah, I'm gonna bypass that because I've seen it, and his studies that women get raped more are bullshit. And you have to give credit here. He could have just said the stats were boring. He could have pulled a Metatron here. I'm gonna skip it because it's boring. No, it's not because it's boring. It's because I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Therefore, I have nothing to address. Case closed. Checkmate.
Also, dude, women have the ability to gain some money by trading their bodies, which homeless men can't.
Now, a lot of people, they know me from my Metatron video, but I've actually done like my fair share of other videos. Mostly they were all like a bunch of experiments, right? Just trying different topics, different formats, things I wasn't familiar with, and you know, seeing what sticks, basically. Last year, I had a bit of a scuffle with the Manosphere, specifically with MGTOW, when I made this video here. Relatively speaking, it doesn't have a lot of views, but everything we're talking about today is like very small scale anyway. This video I made was basically just reacting to basically the first time I ever encountered a slop tuber. At the time I didn't know that was even a thing, to be honest, but they were also kind of new and now I see them everywhere. But I was reacting here to a MGTOW slop tuber who was releasing like 5 videos per day, all thumbnails AI generated, all the titles look the same, and I was just making fun of him while also cracking jokes at MGTOW because I just don't really think it's a very good ideology. I think it's pretty cringe, actually. But, as with a few of my videos on this channel, since I don't have much of an audience to begin with, it seems sometimes YouTube doesn't really know in what corners of YouTube to actually throw my videos, and much like my Charlie Kirk video from a few months ago ended straight into the Charlie Kirk community and they all got mad at me, this video on MGTOW went straight to MGTOW YouTube, and a lot of people, like you can see, like, I missed my hair. Hello everyone. Hey, hold on. Like I said, it doesn't have any views, but I got ratioed, and a lot of comments are about, like, stop taking soy or something. That's basically what it was. However, when I made this video, I got some people who, you know, made like legit arguments, or at least like tried to engage with it critically and said, well, you know, like it seems like you're oversimplifying a lot of stuff with MGTOW. And some of them actually gave me arguments and they gave me videos to look at. So what I decided to do afterwards, I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to give myself a little challenge here. So I'm going to actually look at MGTOW arguments, try and present them accurately, and then give my own critiques and thoughts on it and see if my mind changes on anything. And that's what this second video here was. MGTOW, How to Trivialize Men. In spite of the very low view count, 150 views, considering the amount of time and effort I put into it, which is pretty disappointing, from my perspective, it might actually be one of the better video essays I ever made. Like, I've made a lot of essays on Metatron, obviously, and I've done a bunch of other things, but actually taking a deep plunge, if you will, into MGTOW by going through all of these links, genuinely trying to understand their arguments and then making my own critiques and counter-arguments and providing alternatives, I think that was actually one of my better videos. So if you guys have never seen any of these videos, well, MGTOW itself is kind of irrelevant at this point, but MGTOW, How to Trivialize Men, I wish that video got a little more attention because I do think that it was a pretty solid effort on my part. But anyway, the reason I'm talking about that video right now is because just a few days ago I released my Metatron is so much worse now video. You know, there's kind of like a trickle effect where people watch your video and then they tune into the other ones, and basically what happened is this guy called CityCrusher made a video about me almost at the same time, 3 days ago. Metatron obsessed guy gets schooled on men's issues. I didn't really look him up besides this one video he made on me, obviously, but CityCrusher, as I understand it, the guy told me that he is MRA, men's rights activist, so he's part of the broader manosphere, and he makes a lot of videos, and it seems to just like gravitate towards a lot of that stuff. What I will say is that, like, as a small jab, I guess, like, you made almost 1,000 videos and you only have 2,000 subscribers. His total views is 1 million. His most popular video 14,000 views from 5 years ago, and it is still more or less the same content. So he's been doing this stuff for years, and that's the audience he gets. Like, there's no one else like tuning into this stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, like I barely have like 1,000 subscribers myself, but compared to him, like I've had this channel for 2 years and I barely post on it. Like, they're all like fairly spread apart, and I've got 27 videos. Like, what is this guy doing? We're talking about like really niche communities here. Like, it is crazy how niche that stuff is, how isolated rather. Because when I was talking about MGTOW for myself, like, part of the reason, like, I understand why you didn't get that many views in the first place is because MGTOW was already a fringe ideology over 10 years ago. It's even less so recognized today, so it was already like a very niche part of the manosphere to tackle. But anyway, so that's the video, and then this guy, CityCrusher, made his own. Okay, Metatron, obsessed guy, gets schooled on men's issues, duke it out. Okay, so that's the video. Full disclosure, I did watch it already, and this is why I'm partly doing like my own live react right now, instead of making like a proper video, because I didn't find his counter arguments very compelling. In fact, I found most of them funny, but I don't want to poison the well too much for you guys. So all I really want to do this morning is just go over that video, because hey, it's someone that actually took the time to respond to me, and I appreciate it, you know? We're just gonna have some fun with it, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me stop the music here. Okay, here we go.
All right, this young man, this male feminist, showed up in my feed, and he talks about MGTOW, and he really embarrasses himself.
Okay, so first thing, and again, like, I don't want to get too hung up on this, but how old is this guy? He looks like he's in his mid-60s at least. I feel like that's still kind of important to keep that in mind as we continue, because like a lot of the arguments he makes are the kind of arguments I would expect from a teenager who's watched a lot of Andrew Tate, not from some middle-aged man. How old is this guy, like, still making these arguments, still being stuck in this bubble? And since we already started, like, I'm just gonna do a quick stop here, because I do want to let you know, guys, that I actually did responded to him yesterday, and I asked him if he wanted to talk directly. And he basically, like, you can see the comments from yourself. He says, you know, data goes in my favor, not yours. You support a hate movement. The hate movement in this case is feminism. Hate movements can only lie. I would not believe in any data the KKK provides. Neither would you, because it isn't the hate movement you support. Basically what he's saying here is that I am a part of a movement that he considers a hate movement. None of the data I have is valid, because I'm a feminist, because I lean towards, you know, women's equality and stuff like that. So any of the data I have, and you'll see even at one point in the video, like, he just straight up ignores data, says I don't believe it, and just moves on. So it's like, in a way, I appreciate the honesty, because I was willing to talk to this guy directly. That would have been interesting, but at the same time, if he's telling you from the get-go that no matter what I say, he will never believe a single word I say, then yeah, a conversation would absolutely go nowhere. Don't see an old man doing such videos that often. Yeah, I can't say I have myself, like, ever. But I'm not as much on the internet as people would believe, I guess. Anyway.
He really believes in his own spiel, because he brings up very important MGTOW arguments, statements that are fact, and then tries to deny them. Like, duke it out. You have to have the brain power to know that if you're going to be against men and our well-being, that you have to pick the weakest targets, like Andrew Tate, and go after him. He actually shows these guys what they actually say in context and steelmans their argument. Now let's get to this.
Okay, so right off the bat, this is the one thing I can say that I'm happy for myself. This is what I told him in the comments. Like, he comes off at this saying that, like, I actually did present the arguments that I address accurately. Which is good, you know, like, you don't want to be arguing against stuff that wasn't said. You don't want to be making up strawmans. You don't want to be, misunderstanding the arguments, because then if you misunderstand the arguments, it makes you look like a complete idiot. At least that basis, even within his approach, he says that I actually present the arguments correctly. So at least I'm glad on that. That means, we have a solid basis. We understand each other. We know what we're talking about. This guy's probably able to retire, and he just does this because he really believes it, which is kind of sad when you think about it. Yeah, well, probably. He probably just has a lot of time on his hands. I'm not going to judge him for that. I also have a lot of time on my hands, way too much time to be spending online. But it takes a solid level of conviction to be making these videos non-stop for years, just talking about MRA stuff. Like, holy hell. Anyway.
Now, Spetsnaz, the disposable male. Let's hear what he has to say.
Is one of the central arguments coming from the manosphere pertaining to the oppression of men in society. It's the woman and children. Okay, just so you know, like the video as he plays it on his end is like really laggy. But yeah, so I feel like he's not really giving it a lot of context, but basically what I did in my video is I went over several MGTOW YouTubers and several of their videos, one at a time, each of which covered a specific talking point from MGTOW and broadly the manosphere. And right now I'm going over Spetsnaz, which was someone that was recommended to me, and Spetsnaz, as far as I know, like he's this YouTuber who passed away, and he was doing a lot of MGTOW content like 10, 15 years ago, and because of that, he's almost like a mystical figure in the MGTOW community. And basically, I'm reacting to a video he made now on male disposability, you know, which is like what you see right now, like the woman and children first. And really the question is whether or not that's true, and, you know, what you can blame for the notion of male disposability and what you can do about it, basically. First argument, that whenever there is danger, be it war or a disaster, men are expected to put themselves on the line and protect the women and children with their lives if necessary.
That's 100% known. It's not just observable reality. Guys know that. You know that. Duke it out. This is a fact.
Spetsnaz talks about this concept by using the murder of Austin Hemmings in Auckland, New Zealand. So here's the quick summary of that murder. On September 25, 2008, a woman called Nonu was leaving her office when she was approached by her adopted cousin, a guy called Brown. Brown was pretty pissed because of some drama between the two, and he approached her and started yelling and being aggressive. Nonu called out for help, and a bystander called Austin Hemmings positioned himself between Nonu and Brown and tried to de-escalate the situation, only for Brown to pull up a knife and stab him. Brown was eventually arrested and imprisoned because of it. That's
something he probably wouldn't have done to Nonu, by the way. She probably wasn't in the same danger. She wasn't in the same danger as the man.
Okay, so this is a problem, and I don't even want to put that on the guy specifically, although, you know, he's still a grown-ass man and he should know better. But if you're going to insert your own theories on the fly as you're watching the video, the risk of you making a fool of yourself increases exponentially. Okay, so what he's basically just said, okay, so in that story, no, like I didn't have a picture for her, this is the guy who was murdered and this is the murderer. He just said that he probably would have never attacked Nonu. You know, that because this guy put himself in between, he was the one who got murdered. That's his argument right there. Pay close attention to what I actually say right after that in the video.
Matter of fact, he probably pissed him off. He said, who is this white knight getting in between me and this woman, who I'm just arguing with?
The short story, although a critical element that somewhat explains Brown's murderous behavior, was that he was already a convicted murderer, as he was jailed for stabbing an ex-girlfriend a decade prior, something that I'm not sure the woman knew, but Austin definitely could not possibly have known in the moment. But that was the story.
He couldn't have known it, but at the same time, he wouldn't have done this for a man.
Okay, that's your argument? You want to address the part where you said he would have never done anything to Nonu even though he was already convicted of killing his ex-girlfriend? Oh, he would never hurt a woman, even though he did before. He murdered a woman before. Also, he pulled out a knife. Who carries a knife around? I know for a fact that he doesn't get that far into this section before he skips to the next, but in the story of that murder, what happened immediately after Austin Hemmings was stabbed is that Nonu ran back into her office building, which was like right there, and the guy, Brown, followed her with the knife, attacked her, tried to pull her out of the elevator, and she had to fight him off. You know, she managed to close the elevator doors on him, but she was, I think she was injured? I'm not sure, but the point is, he did attack her. Just arguing with, pulls out a knife before Hemmings even intervened. But that's the thing. So what you need to understand is, the murderer in this case had already murdered a woman before. He was carrying a knife, and after he stabbed Austin, he ran after Nonu with the knife. It's very reasonable to assume here that had Austin not intervened, he would have just stabbed her right there on the street, just as easily as he did Austin, and just as easily as he did his ex-girlfriend a couple of years before that. But you see how ridiculous that is? Like, he immediately just stops in, instantly makes an assertion that's immediately debunked after a few seconds, and then he tries to pivot to another point. And what was that point again?
He couldn't have known it, but at the same time, he wouldn't have done this for a man. That's something that Spetsnaz brought up as well.
How do you know that? You know, the one thing that they say about Austin Hemmings that his family said about him after he died is that he was the kind of guy who helped people, that he did that all the time. And also, like, I'm just talking about, like, you know, fights that escalate. Fights break out and they get broken up all the time. If it was another guy and there was an argument, maybe he would have looked for like different signs. Maybe he would have reacted differently because, you know, putting himself between two guys is more dangerous than putting himself between a guy and a woman. But you don't actually know that. You're making an assertion here that's not backed up by anything. At least I'm dealing with the facts here. But this guy, Trevor, at this point, he's basically just trying to distract away from the fact that whatever he said before that was completely ridiculous and instantly debunked. Anyway.
Which is 100% true. If this guy, since he cares so much about his family, right, why didn't he say, hey, I have children to look after. I got to think about them. I'll tell you why. Because the man wanted validation from a strange woman over the care of his children. It's that simple.
But this is also something I bring up in the video. If Austin doesn't know the other guy, if Austin doesn't know that the other guy is a convicted murderer, if he doesn't know that the guy has a knife, how is he supposed to just look at an argument and think, well, you know, am I really going to put my life on the line for this? Nobody in this situation would know they're putting their life on the line. That's kind of the point here. You know, Austin, like, you can look at that guy, like, he's not a strong guy. He's not, like, super buff. He's not, like, hyper masculine or whatever. The Brown is coming off very aggressive, and Nono is just looking around like, can someone, you know, come and help me out? It's like, it shows a clear power imbalance here, and that's the reason Austin intervened. If there were two guys arguing, if they were at similar levels, that's not the same thing at all. A bystander tried to intervene and got murdered for it. It's a senseless tragedy caused by a man that should, quite frankly, never have been let out of jail, but it is what it is. From this example, Spetsnaz makes the argument that Austin Hemmings' intervention was the result of society pressuring men to put themselves on the line for women because...
But it's also innate, because Austin wouldn't have done that for a man.
No, see, again, this is what I'm talking about. So there's also an element in the manosphere that a lot of the things they're complaining about, you know, male disposability, they all make it out to be biological. You just said it, you know, like, it's innate. He saw a woman and he had this innate urge to be a white knight. Like, no. As I've said, you know, Austin was described by his family and loved ones and friends as someone who just wanted to help people all the time. Trying to make it innate, first of all, you have no evidence. You have no scientific evidence to suggest that men are predisposed to sacrifice themselves to women. Like, that's not a thing.
Saw two men arguing and one guy called for help. He'd either walk the other way or at best he'd call the police. He wouldn't have interfered for that man.
But he would have still done something. That's what we're talking about here. You're saying it yourself. Like, if it was two men, he may not have intervened the same way he did, but he would have still done something. So that kind of defeats your argument right there. They are taught that women need protection, while men are taught to be disposable. Now, there's definitely a grain of truth to the idea that men are taught to do this.
No, it's not a grain of truth. This is where you're being dishonest. It is the truth.
Now, the reason I say it's a grain of truth is because it's true that it happens. What is not true is the explanation. You say it's innate, I disagree. And that's what I'm about to get into.
And you know it.
My issues with this video, though, apart from the fact that I don't think the example used is a good one when you take in all of the surrounding context, is what's...
I do. I think it's a perfect example.
Okay, good for you.
It's that guy Austin, he knew better. He should have kept his nose out of it and just called the police.
And again, what would have happened in that scenario? Like, I'm not saying that it could have been a better outcome or whatever, but the guy already had a knife. He was also already a convicted murderer for stabbing a woman. Chances are, if he had not intervened, she would have been stabbed herself right there and then. You know, I'm not saying that he needs to sacrifice himself to save that woman, but I am saying that if he does nothing, that is likely what happens. So if you're in a situation where someone is likely to get hurt, and there's a chance that you might be able to prevent that by intervening yourself, isn't that just the right thing to do? I'm sure that 80% of heated arguments on the street are broken up without someone being killed, so he is just supposed to assume it's deadly for him. Exactly, this is what I mean. There's an assumption here. He was going to die if he intervened, and so his mistake was to intervene, but how do you know this? You're right, like 80%, I'm sure it's much higher than that, like probably much, much higher than that.
And he wouldn't have done it for a man calling his help.
Okay, you still don't know that. You're still just assuming. Spetsnaz blames for this culture, and the solutions he proposes, or rather, the lack of constructive solutions. Spetsnaz blames the government and women for enforcing the idea of chivalry.
That's right. That's right. Women do demand chivalry from men. That's absolutely 100% true.
Part of chivalry, men are incentivized to serve women, to protect women with their lives if necessary, because the alternative socially is to be deemed a coward and never having a partner as a result. But this is where we get to the problem I was talking about, that MGTOW and broadly the manosphere, they can't call the problem what it really is, or provide solutions for it, because to do so would be to align themselves with feminists, and the manosphere stands in a position.
Well, why would a man align himself with the people who hate his guts? You're the type of guy who would go to the civil rights movement and say, hey, why don't you align yourselves with the KKK?
Can you think of like a worst example to make your point? And I know it's really not going to matter what I say to this guy, because this is a guy who, again, possibly retired in his 60s, who is talking of feminism as just like a misandrist, like hate movement, who just wants to hurt men, If I tell him that that's not what it does, like there's no getting to that guy in this context. But that's why he makes that comparison. He thinks, oh, your civil rights movement, like liberation of black people, trying to ally with the KKK, who actively wants to hurt them. Like, it makes sense in his head because he thinks of feminism as the KKK for men, literally. And it's completely fucking stupid, obviously. I think it goes without saying. You can look, and because I bring up the arguments, I do bring up the arguments from feminism. That's not what it is at all. Feminism is about equality between men and women. But obviously, you're asking me why you would align yourself with a hate movement? It's not so much aligning yourself with a hate movement, it's knowing when the argument is correct. As a quick example, okay? Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh, I think, is an absolute piece of shit. That guy is an absolute scumbag, and I pretty much hate everything that he does. However, I once saw something about him getting into a beef with people on Twitter, and they were arguing about, whether they should be drinking raw milk. And Matt Walsh was saying, no, you shouldn't be drinking raw milk. It's fucking stupid. It's gonna make you sick. It doesn't actually do anything. Pasteurization is one of the best things that ever happened. And you know what? I agree with Matt Walsh here. I think on that one specific take, he was based. Even if for virtually everything else, I would completely disagree with him on everything. The fact is, you can be an asshole. You can even if you perceive someone to be your enemy, that doesn't mean that they can't sometimes make correct arguments. And that's really all that matters here, in terms of, what I'm talking about. What I'm saying here is that they won't align themselves with feminists because they stand against feminism. And when he says, well, why would we align ourselves with a group that hates us? Well, that's my point. Your movement is not so much about empowering men, it's just about standing in opposition to feminism. So if feminism sees the same problem that you do, in this specific context, we're talking about the same problem, which is male disposability. So if feminism has a correct understanding of male disposability and offers concrete solutions, even then you will not entertain any of it because you care more about standing opposite to feminism than you care about solving male disposability. That's the real truth here. It's also really dumb because if you look, this is a problem with Spetsnaz in that video, and it's pretty much the problem with all of these other MGTOW YouTubers. It's that their only solution is to go your own way. It's to isolate yourself. It's to say, fuck society, fuck everybody. I'm just going to do my own thing. And if anyone ever needs help, that's not my problem. I'm just going to be doing my own thing. I don't think that's a very effective way to run your life. I don't think it's an effective way of living in society. And it doesn't actually solve any of the other problems, because male disposability still exists, even if you choose to isolate yourself. That societal phenomenon is still going to be there. It's still going to manifest for other men. What are you going to do about these other men that you pretend to care about? You're not going to do anything because you're just isolating yourself. And then you go online and tell them, well, the reason you shouldn't help women is because they're all whores anyway. You are right not to do anything. You are right not to address the problem any further. And if ever you get a succinct analysis from feminism, you should just disregard it instantly because it's a hate movement anyway, and never question any of that. That's basically the gist of this whole video, really.
Because they would tell you they're the ones burning the crosses on my lawn.
I still own the analogy.
And that's why men don't, if they're smart, align themselves with a hate movement against them. Now, you have. So, just shows you just how desperate men are.
Position to feminism first and cares for men second. Case in point, the cultural incentive to prioritize the safety of women above that of men is true. But it's not the government pushing chivalry, or women playing men into sacrificing themselves and doing all the work, otherwise they get no coochie or whatever. The real problem is, say it with me, the patriarchy.
Okay, you actually believe in your own spiel. So The patriarchy made a bunch of women give white feathers to men.
Yes, actually. Here he's talking about the white feather campaign, and to be completely honest, I had never actually heard of what that was. We're going to get into it in a second, but I just want to point out, I do find it really funny that for him to make an argument that society is misandrous, he needs to look at one movement, one campaign, in one country from 100 years ago. You'd think you'd be able to cite more recent examples for something like this, but let's get into it. The White Feather Campaign was a prominent enlistment campaign and shaming ritual in Britain during the First World War in which women gave white feathers to non-enlisting men, symbolizing cowardice and shaming them into signing up. So let's go to the background here because I think it's important. At the outset of World War I, Britain relied on voluntary enlistment. However, as the war stretched long, and Britain started running out of working-age men to death or injury, there was a shortage of troops which promoted the government to start conscripting men in 2016. And later decreasing the age of conscription through the Military Service Act. Britain also started recruiting teenagers, with about 250,000 minors serving in the country in World War I. In August 1914, Admiral Charles Penrose Fitzgerald founded what became known as the Order of the White Feather. He enlisted groups of young women to hand out white feathers, a traditional symptom of cowardice, to men in civilian attire in public places. So the government started doing conscription, the government lowered the enlisting age, and the government started the White Feather Campaign. Who was running the government? Who came up with this idea? This guy. This guy said, we should give white feather to other men. We're just gonna have women do it. And why were they having the women do it? Because women were not expected to fight. And that's the thing that you need to understand is that, again, like I bring up the argument of the patriarchy. The patriarchy is a very broad concept, a social concept. And it's really just the idea that in societies that are predominantly run by men, they prioritize men. The patriarchy created gender roles that affect men and women in different specific ways. Men were the ones expected to be the fighters. They were the ones expected to be the providers, and women were expected to be the home caregivers or whatever. So basically, the reason you had women doing this is because there was no notion of women being cowards for not joining the war, because women were not expected to join the war. Women were forbidden to join the war. Even if they wanted to, even if, they had voluntary enlistment, women were not allowed to enlist. Women were not allowed to vote for the war. Women were not allowed a say in anything regarding the war. What they were allowed is to be part of the shaming campaign that would shame men by reinforcing the patriarchal expectations on them to be men, to be strong, to go to war. That's what the White Feather Campaign was. And it's hilarious to me that he would just completely ditch this part here where it actually says that like the idea actually came from another guy. But this idea that like, oh, like women, they passed white feathers around to shame men. Like, yeah, they did. And it was the idea of one of the high-ranking officers in that country. He was the one who started doing that. Anyway, that's why like it is so stupid.
This is the government wanting men to go to war and women wanting them to go to war out of...
Wait.
No, these are women gladly doing this. This is the government wanting men to go to war.
Okay, who runs the government? Like, you're kind of answering yourself here, man. You have your own answer. And again, the women here in this campaign were reinforcing the patriarchal structure by staying home, by not doing the war themselves, but shaming men for not fulfilling their duties as men.
And women wanting them to go to war out of sadism.
No. Like you can read further into this. The women, the suffragettes, they switched their focus during that time from fighting for women's rights to fighting for the preservation of Britain, which is why they took part in that campaign. At least in part, why they took part in that campaign. It was doing what they can to make sure that the army wins, and they were doing so by, using a shaming campaign to get men to enlist. It was horrible, it was pretty bad, but let's not pretend like men were not actively involved, like the patriarchy wasn't actively involved, because it was. Anyway.
These women know that they will never, ever have to self-sacrifice.
Yeah, and why? Why won't they have to self-sacrifice? Is it because they're equal?
So you are just obviously wrong about this.
Well, again, you haven't actually addressed any of it. You brought out one example, and you're just saying that patriarchy doesn't exist. Like, I'm in the process of talking about it in that video, and I just expanded upon it now, so.
What's your name again? Stuck out or stick your neck? Oh, duke it out. Yeah, duke it out. You're just obviously wrong.
How? Again, who runs society? Who ran the societies back then? Who made the choices? What were the choices that women had? What were the expectations that were forced onto men? What were the expectations that were forced onto women? What are those expectations that still exist today? Where is it coming from? You can observe that something is happening. You can observe male disposability, but you need to be able to call it for what it is. If your argument is, well, we live in a misandrist, matriarchal society, then you need to explain how that happens. Like, where are these women making all the decisions? Because I don't see them anywhere. Representation is getting a little better, let's say. But most positions of power today are still overwhelmingly run, occupied, made by men. That's just a fact. I think he's watching a different video from a whole different multiverse. He's not making sense. Well, again, this is a guy who made 900 videos over like a decade, barely has 2,000 subscribers. Like, this is like a very niche bubble that we're into right now.
History is very easy to look back on.
Spetsnaz's credit, he does acknowledge the patriarchy argument, although he doesn't really address it.
No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't, guys. Listen to this.
But when you discuss it, I mean, you hear the comments. Now, patriarchy is damaging to males too, but it's a deflection. Male disposability is only raised in a discussion so it can be swept aside, and blame will always be placed on men. No, he knew the risks, but he still took the job. No, men run the government. No, so it's all men's fault. No, sorry. But social conditioning.
See, he's actually mocking the idea of patriarchy.
Yeah, I know he's mocking the idea. The only point I was making is that patriarchy is an argument to explain male disposability, and I was just saying that Spetsnaz does bring it up. You know, I know that Spetsnaz disagrees with it. I know that Spetsnaz mocks it. I'm just saying, like, he did bring it up. Like, he acknowledged that that's an argument that people make. That's it.
Patriarchy. Duke it out. To blame it on patriarchy, you may as well blame it on leprechauns. The patriarchy doesn't exist. We live in a matriarchy.
Okay, how? Please, define to me how you live in a matriarchy. Where are the women making all the decisions? Where are the women controlling everything? You say you can just observe reality. Where are they? Women are only now, for the past half century, getting into the workforce. They're barely being let in the military right now, at least in combat roles. They're barely starting to get in. Where's the matriarchy?
And we always have.
Always have. When? I mean, I'm sure you can look at some societies in the past that were matriarchal in nature. I know they existed, but overwhelmingly, we have always been living in the patriarchy. And it's funny because every time you hear conservatives, you know, they talk about wanting to go back to the past and how, you know, like, oh, you know, the man used to be the head of the family and make all the decisions. Was that a matriarchy back then? Is that what you want to go back to? What is this?
Is never factored into it. The lack of viable options for men is never factored into it. And the fact that women get men to do all the work for them, it doesn't mean women get to avoid taking an equal share of the responsibility. So this belief that women are innocent, blameless victims in an evil patriarchy is ridiculous.
There you go. This idea that women are innocent, blameless victims in an evil patriarchy is ridiculous. There you go. So he was mocking the idea of patriarchy. Mm-hmm. You can't even get it right.
No, like I said, I know he was mocking it. I was just pointing out that he does bring up the argument, acknowledging that it's an argument that's made, that's all. But is it, though? If you live in a society that has been traditionally run by men to prioritize men, then is there...
No. It is to prioritize women.
How? Again, how? How does it benefit a woman to be stuck in the home and being subservient to men, not having any decision-making power? You go back just 100 years ago, and if women were not married by the time they were 30, they had no career options because they couldn't work. They were made legally to depend on men. That's what I mean. Like, you can pick this argument apart any day. The idea that that we live in like a global matriarchy, insane. What you can say is that male disposability is one specific instance in the patriarchy where it seems like women are being prioritized over men, but it's also, it's just a form of secular logic, because the idea is that if the woman if the mother is the one supposed to take care of the children, and the children are the priority, then if you put in a situation where you can either save the father or the mother, you're going to try and save the mother because she's the one who's better for the kids. And then she can just get remarried to another man. In that sense, men are disposable, but they're only disposable because women are put in that specific role and can never get out of it. If you were to be in a situation today where you have a father who's a stay-at-home dad and takes care of the children all the time, and the mother's always away at work, you would put them in divorce courts, and the judge would almost certainly give custody to the dad because he's the one that the children are used to being with. This is something I'll also go later on in my video that he completely skips. But that's the part. Once you take out the gender roles that are enforced by the patriarchy, a lot of this doesn't make sense anymore. A lot of it just kind of falls flat. And that's what this guy is completely failing to understand.
It's to prioritize women, not men.
They're a bigger influence in society than patriarchy itself. You can't suggest that women have been manipulating men over the centuries to sacrifice.
Yes, I can suggest that. I'm not just suggesting it. I'm saying it outright.
Yeah, and you're wrong.
And history's on my side.
It's really not.
Not yours.
It is on my side. Themselves, when society is run by men, have stripped those same women of virtually all power until very recently.
No. Bullshit lie. Bullshit.
You got any counter evidence for that? Or you're just going to call it bullshit? Is that the standard for it to be false?
Men running the country doesn't mean they're in charge.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So the women, I guess, are just like puppeteers. The real shadow government was a bunch of women the whole time, just like stringing those powerful men along like marionettes.
Right. If men are running the country, how come the women get to just hang around and be taken care of, and the men have to go to war?
They're being taken care of because they're also being stripped of all the rights that prevents them from taking care of themselves, dude. Did they have a choice to seek a career? Did they have a choice to be independent women living by themselves, paying their own bills, owning their own house, owning their own bank account? This is what you don't seem to understand. You seem to think that because they're put in a gilded cage, that makes them privileged. But what a feminist would say is that the women are put in a gilded cage under the patriarchy, and the men are put under like a blazing inferno, where men are constantly suffering because they're put in a position where they have to do all the work themselves to support a woman that is deemed too useless to do anything besides raising the kids. So men are put to war, and women are completely stripped of their ambition. They're completely stripped of any aspirations they might have. They have nothing else they can do. This is what you don't seem to understand. There's a difference between not having to join a war and not having to join a war because you're perceived to be useless. And because you're perceived to be useless and because you're perceived to be less than a man, you basically don't have any rights. You don't have any agency of your own. Teleme says, dogs are actually more privileged than humans since they don't have to work and are fed and sheltered. We need to unite against dogs and cats. Exactly! That's the same thing. If you're going to use that argument, you might as well say, like cats and dogs are the real masters of the world. Pets. Pets, they have it real good. They're the ones deciding everything. Society's run to make pets live good lives while we toll away. By that logic, that's exactly what it is.
Again, that's not a patriarchy, dude.
Patriarchy is what gives men the belief that they must protect women, because patriarchy presents women as the weaker gender that needs protection, while men have been brought up as providers and protectors.
No, dude. No, dude. Women demand it. You either stand up for them or you get deselected. That's how it works.
No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that.
You know what I'm saying is true because you're a male feminist. You're aligning with the powers that are actually against you.
How are they against me? No, how are they against me? Feminism gets in power. How does it affect me? What's going to happen to me? I'm a feminist right now. Women have equal rights and they're continuously fighting to get equal rights. What happens to me? I'm just fine. I see a lot of people arguing that, the reason I would do this is that I have an ulterior motive, but it's like, just because you only do things when there's something that comes back to you doesn't mean that that's what everybody does. Maybe I just believe that women should have equal rights. Not because I'm hoping to get a relationship out of it, not because I'm trying to get the approval of some specific people. Maybe I actually just believe that a society would be better if people just got treated equally. How about that? I also don't get how this is necessarily a bad thing. Is it bad for a white man to be against racism even if he loses privileges? Exactly, this is the same thing. Privilege as it's defined. You're like, if we were talking about white privilege isn't, what you have. It's what you're not getting. You're not having to deal with systemic racism. You're not having to deal with discrimination. You're not having to deal with racial stereotypes. So it's not so much that you get something, when you're white. It's that there are things that other people deal with that you don't have to deal with. And it's kind of the same thing here, Women have to deal with things that I don't have to deal with. If they didn't have to deal with those things, that doesn't mean that I would be the one who suddenly has to deal with those things. It just means that nobody has to deal with it because we're equal. Like, there you go.
This is your form of getting selection, or at least validation.
Again, you think I want validation from women. No, it's just what I believe. There are women out there, like Pearl Davis, who's an anti-feminist. She's been called the female Andrew Tate. If that woman came to me and she said, I don't think women should have the right to vote, which is one of the main things that she was spewing about for the past couple of years, I would tell her, you're really fucking stupid. If you don't want to vote, fine, don't use your vote, but I want women to vote. I want women to have an equal say in how society goes. I don't need Pearl Davis's approval. I'm not just going to agree with somebody because I'm trying to get their approval. I personally do see it as a stripping of privilege, but only in relative terms. In absolute terms, a post-feminist man is in a greater position than he was before feminism. Unfortunately, you will never get a good understanding of feminism from a guy like this, because that's what it is. But when feminism talks about patriarchy, they're also talking about how patriarchy affects the men too, how it hurts them too. And that's what I talk also about in this video. Maybe we'll get to it, I have no idea, because it's already getting really long. But toxic masculinity, the expectation of men to always be stoic, of never showing emotions, that hurts men. So when it's brought up by feminists, it's to end these expectations so that men are better for it. The same way that, they want to break down gender roles so that men don't feel like they have to be the providers. If a woman wants to be the provider and the man feels they'd be more comfortable being at home and taking care of the children, feminism makes that possible. It gives men that option. And for men who would thrive in a situation like this, feminism does make it much better for them. That's what feminism theory is, broadly. That a lot of it revolves around the patriarchy and how deconstructing it would both help men and women.
The opposite sex. Now, guys, the Scum Manifesto is for cutting up men. That's what it stands for. I think it's society, but it's cutting up men. It's harming men. So when you side with feminist, that's what you're siding with. That was embraced.
Are you siding with Elliot Rogers, Trevor? Are you siding with all the incels that commit acts of violence? Are you siding with Andrew Tate as he traffics women? This is the only thing I'll have to say about it, because obviously, he wants to make out feminism to be this one unified movement that is only defined by its most extremes, by its most extreme members, I guess. I'm not familiar with that book, but if that book says we should castrate men or something, I disagree with that. But do you know how many feminists actually advocate for castrating men, if you can even call them feminists at this point? Listen, I will own up to these extremes and say they're wrong if you can do the same with Elliot Rogers. If you can do the same with Elliot Rogers, acknowledge that Elliot Rogers was on your side, believed all the things that you believe, and just took them further than you did, and that's the part that you disown, okay. Then we can both acknowledge that just because there are some extremes doesn't mean that we have to associate with them all the time. It doesn't mean that we have to let them define us. The same way that in feminism, I consider myself a feminist in principle, but it's not like I attach myself to any specific branches of feminism, but there's lots of them. There's feminists who are sex positive, there are feminisms who are sex negative. I would consider myself a sex positive feminist in that particular instance, but it really comes down to, what the beliefs are. There's a lot of internal disagreement in all movements. This is why MGTOW used to be at war with the pickup artists. They had their own internal struggle. You know what I mean?
And no group of feminists have ever disavowed that.
I'm pretty sure they have. I could look it up, but you're not bothering to look it up right now, so I won't either. But hey, I'm a feminist. If there are a radical woman out there saying we should castrate men, I disavow it. So there you go. That's all the data you need. The ones who work the dangerous jobs and go to war. But if you want to understand how this is all affected by the patriarchy, just take any instance where men die disproportionately that would support the argument of male disposability and make these situations equal. For example, do men make up the majority of military casualties? Yes, definitely.
That's right. That's right. They do. Right. So that's not patriarchal. In a patriarchal society, those would be female.
No, again, you don't understand. That's because you don't understand what patriarchy means, dude.
Not male stats.
But looking back at all of those wars, were women even allowed to join the military in combat roles? No.
Don't even bother, dude. Don't even bother.
Why not?
These women did not want to join the military. Ever. They definitely don't want to go to war. Look, how many men went AWOL? What's that expression for the guys who avoid war, right? Who ran away from the draft dodgers. There are male draft dodgers. Now, whenever the conscription of women are brought up, a bunch of women get together and protest it.
Yeah, what you need to understand right now, Trevor, is that you're conflating voluntary enlistment with conscription and drafts. I think he brings it up again later, but, we'll talk about it then.
Why would women protest something that they want to join? Right?
Oh, well, there you go.
Feminist and pacifist organizations in the United States have consistently opposed the inclusion of women in the military drafts legislation.
Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. He's conflating voluntary enlistment with the draft. The draft is not voluntary. The draft means that if there's a war and they need recruits, you're drafted. You're called up, regardless of what you want, regardless of what you're doing with your life. We are drafting you, putting you in the military. No one volunteers for the draft because the draft is compulsory, not voluntary. When we're talking about women fighting in the military, we're talking about women who want to enlist. When we're talking about the draft, that's about forcing people to join the military. And the big problem with that argument, what's completely left out here, is that when feminists protest against the draft, they're actually wanting to abolish it for men also. This is actually like one of the recurring arguments that I hear constantly. The manosphere in the past few years, it's like, oh, well, men have to go for the draft. Like, if there's a war, like, I'm a man, I have to go, and you just get to stay here. And, like, that's totally true, so let's end the draft. Let's just end it. The draft, to be clear, like, I think the last batch of men that have ever been drafted into a war were born in 1958. Any man that was born after 1958 in the US, that's something I researched when I made my video. Any man born after 1958 in the States has never been drafted. Not a single one. Now, technically, it's still there. And that means that if they ever put the draft again, that could be a problem. The issue, though, is that the United States right now is a voluntary force of like 1 million soldiers. What kind of war would there be for the states to say 1 million isn't enough, we need to pull in the draft? And at the same time, I'm pretty sure that if it did happen again, everybody would be protesting it and it would be shut down immediately. That said, again, the issue here is just abolish the draft. It's something that, like, I was just talking about Pearl Davis. This is the reasoning behind Pearl Davis. She was like, well, if women want to have equal rights, then they also should have to join the draft. And the counter to that is, well, what if we just end the draft, so neither men nor women have to join it? Problem solved. But again, like, just to make it clear here, this is what this guy is conflating. He's conflating the draft with voluntary enlistment. Women have been wanting to join the military in a voluntary capacity for a long time. Granted, it's not a lot of women, because it takes women who, want to fight in wars, it's something that's more traditionally associated with men, so a lot of women have been historically discouraged from, joining the military. But still.
They're not opposing the draft itself, just including women.
They are opposing the draft itself. This is the other thing we have to talk with this guy. Like, I'm all for highlighting, like, AI summaries of your Google search, but you still have to control how you're Googling it. If he says women protest against the military drafting woman, yeah, you're going to get an AI result that makes it specifically about what you want. If you just had women protest against the military draft, you would probably find a lot of results of, feminist groups wanting to just abolish the draft. This is like a very lazy tactic that this guy uses through his video. Like he just enters prompts into Google that give him the results that he wants. It's like the most laziest, obvious confirmation bias that you can ever see.
And that includes feminist, dude, the ones that you claim are good for men.
Yeah, they are.
So your falsehoods that you're spreading are just so easy to debunk.
No, actually, like I just explained it, and you're conflating voluntary enlisting and conscription. Those are not the same.
But continue.
Please. Most all casualties are going to be men, but feminists have been fighting for the right to join the military for decades.
No, they haven't, dude. No, they haven't. They've been fighting for decades to keep women out.
No, they've been fighting to end the draft. You moron. Wake up. Hello? There's a difference between drafting and voluntary enlisting. If a woman wanted to enlist voluntarily, feminists would be like, yay, more power to you, power girl. Go fight in the military, that's what you want to do, you're a feminist, go. And then she would go to the army, and the army would say, well, you're a woman, so we can't. And that would end it right there. Women joining military, that's a very much a new phenomenon for a lot of countries, including the US. But you're still conflating the both.
Duke it out. Why would you tell such an obvious lie?
It's the truth. You're just not understanding it.
That is so easily seen as a lie. Why would you do this?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Do you actually believe in your own lies?
I do. I am very delusional. And they're only now getting it. It's the same with firefighters and police. You can't complain that men die.
If they want to, there's a difference between joining and being drafted.
Yes. That's the point I'm making. You have that smug on your face, but like, understand. Feminists are against the draft, period. They didn't just say like, oh, we want our freedom, we want our equality, but if men are forced to go to war, we don't care about them, they can go off and die. Nobody wants to be drafted, exactly.
Joining in during peacetime is not the same as being drafted for war.
Yeah, and if they enlist voluntarily and then the country goes to war or they're deployed, then they're deployed. That's how it works. For everybody. The men who enlist voluntarily right now, if they're in peacetime, will go through the same process as if a woman joins voluntarily. If your issue is that men are oppressed because they're being drafted, let's end the draft. That's my feminist position. Let's end the draft. Are we in agreement? Or are you going to oppose it because I'm a feminist and you can't believe a word I say? Am I hurting men by being a feminist who wants to end the draft? Yes, firefighters, if you're not even letting women join in the first place.
No, bull crap. I'm going to bypass that because you know something? I've already proven this guy is false.
No, hold on. I just made another argument, which is that, if men make up the bulk of firefighter casualties, it's also because women are not allowed to join as firefighters, which is absolutely correct. And there's no draft for being firefighters, so the voluntary aspect here is the only one you have to deal with. For you to just call it bullcrap without addressing why it's bullcrap, and then just skipping ahead, it makes it clear that you don't really have any arguments against it.
Male homelessness. Let's get into this.
Video called The Male Homeless. In this video, Spitsnaz talks about the struggle of homeless men and how being homeless is a vicious cycle that is very hard to escape. If anything, that video is pretty good at humanizing homeless people and explaining...
Men. It's men that are homeless, dude.
Okay, but both men and women can be homeless. So whatever is being said of the experience of men being homeless can also to an extent be said of women. So I know that he's centering on men, but it's not exclusive to men regardless. Just how bad the situation is. It's a big problem in society today that we tend to dehumanize homeless people as outcasts. The only way we can really enjoy our lives and comforts, knowing that some people live in the street and barely survive at all, is by convincing ourselves that their situation is solely the result of poor decision making. This is a logic that allows us to ignore the very real fact that our system is rigged in a way that will screw people over and keep them at the bottom to keep others at the top.
But the problem with it doesn't explain the difference in the genders.
Yeah, and I will do that, if you let me.
If it's just a system keeping people down, then the genders would still be 50-50.
They are, more or less. When it comes to who ends up at the bottom in the street, you will find a disparity, but then I explain why that disparity happens. It's not because more men are homeless, it's because there are more resources dedicated to women to prevent them from being homeless. But that difference matters because women don't experience homelessness the same way as men. They experience it worse. A lot of them have children with them, which means that when you're accounting for women who are homeless, you also have to account for homeless children. And when women have children, and they're the vast majority of homeless people who have children, then resources are going to be allocated to them because they are the ones who are in the most dire situation.
And they aren't.
By ignoring that, we don't have to change anything about society or ourselves. But as Spetsnaz points out, the very state of homelessness, regardless of how one achieves it, can make a problem significantly worse than it already was. Between the strain on mental health that comes with the uncertainty of homelessness, the unreliable source of shelter and food, the violence, the drugs, the countless arrests and abuse, an individual's mental health can deteriorate very quickly when they're homeless. The risks to physical health, from dehydration to malnutrition, can make everything worse. So I do think raising awareness of homelessness from this angle is crucial. But in the case of...
Yeah, but we're talking about the differences in the gender, dude.
Okay, but is there a solution to prevent male homelessness that could not also be applied to homeless women? I mean, if you really want to get at it from that angle, like I understand, and that's the point that Spetsnaz is making, but I'm arguing that it's a silly point to make. It's a silly angle to tackle, because what is leading people to homelessness is not inherently like a misandrist society. There are issues, yes, but you can solve those issues in a way that helps everyone. If you're helping homeless men, what happens to the homeless woman? They just stay there? And you're like, well, you know, men have had it hard for so long from living under a matriarchy, so women can suffer a little bit. You know, let them be homeless. We've done good, you know?
So keep on track.
In Spetsnaz video, I just find myself asking, why is the focus solely on men here? Now, yes, men make up the bulk of homeless people.
There you go. You just answered your own question.
Hey, but hold on, you can't trust my data. Why are you trusting this? Because it agrees with you? But I'm making a feminist argument right now. You can't rely on this.
The bulk. And even the number you are showing, duke it out, is low. 68.4% are considered male. It's much higher than that. And the reason why I can say that is, let's see if we can't find it here. Yes, right here. Now, the percentage of, for example, what did I do? In Chicago is higher. It says 79%.
Okay. So the average in the United States is 70 to 30, but that average is different in Chicago. Those are still averages. That doesn't take away from my point at all. That's a nothing burger.
So you say the United States, but notice it's higher in Chicago. But more importantly, this is what women get. Available research underestimate the scales of women's homelessness in Canada, because women are more likely to experience hidden homelessness. What is hidden homelessness? Well, hidden homelessness refers to individuals who are living temporarily with friends, family, or strangers without a guarantee of continued residency. So they're claiming that women who are housed, that are sleeping on someone's couch, are the same as homeless. And they would include that. The only problem is they don't include.
The first problem is that the document that you showed with hidden homelessness, for one, was from a Canadian website, which is fine in of itself. I end up using homelessness data from Canada as well. But this specific one is from the US. So you can say that there might be a proportion of women who are experiencing hidden homelessness, but that study is from Canada. It doesn't reflect how it's being accounted for in demographic surveys from the US. So how it's measured in the US and how it's measured in Canada can be very different. But you can't just mix them up like that. It doesn't work. This is like saying that the homelessness rate is higher if you count fewer people who have a home. Exactly. If you count... Imagine if homelessness is defined by people who are not homeowners. That would drastically increase because all renters would be considered homeless, you know? Like, it comes down to how you define it. But if you have two different statistics that come from two different countries, you gotta be careful about that. It's an obvious mistake here.
Include men. What's that old expression? The guy living in his mother's basement, right? Supposedly those guys abound. Yet those guys who are living in their mother's basement, they're not included as homeless, right?
Yeah, because the definition of hidden homelessness is when you're at constant risk of not having that couch anymore. If you're living in your mother's basement where you have your bed, your computer, and you're completely set up and there's no discussion at all of you being kicked out or having to go live somewhere else, that's not hidden homelessness. You're just living at your parents'. Hidden homelessness, I don't think a woman who's living at her parents also. Like, I'll just give that example, okay? Like, I have a sibling who just went back. My sister, my younger sister, lately, like, she moved back in with my parents because she's in university and she's saving money from not having to pay rent. Is she homeless? Is she experiencing hidden homeless? She still has her room. That's what I mean. Like, you're making, like, such a stupid comparison. Like, it makes no sense. You're just desperate to make a point, but you don't have one. Hidden homelessness is typically not with family, with random strangers who are exploiting you. Yeah, exactly. Like, I've made a video on my channel for those who are curious. About the time I left, I let a homeless woman sleep on my couch. She went from homelessness that night to experiencing hidden homeless. But she left the next morning. That's what it is, you know? Like, if you're with family, that doesn't count as hidden homelessness unless your family is treating you the same way a stranger would, which would be sad, and I'm sure it happens. But this is what I mean, like... It's so random.
They're not included as hidden homeless.
Yeah, because that makes no sense.
So you can see that is your stat. I don't buy into it. Right? It's much higher than that.
Yeah, it's much higher in Chicago. This is an average for the country. Hello? Are we all here? What's going on? Is this like your reading comprehension at your age? How old are you, man?
And there's an obvious bias from the government towards men when it comes to homelessness.
People. But that doesn't mean that homelessness is predominantly a male problem. Nor is it...
Well, dude, even the stats you were getting that are underestimating it is still majority male.
Yeah, but there's more to it than that. That's the point. You have to read into these stats. You have to read into these phenomena. Try and better understand how these things occur, how they manifest, what the symptoms are. Like, I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert. I'm certainly not an academic or anything, but I can read this and I can understand it better than you. So you have to put more work into it than just like quick headlines. I'm using the headlines as introductory research, but then I move on into showing more data.
It's more than double.
And as Ari just said, homelessness is much more dangerous for women, so they go to much more extreme measures to avoid it at any cost. Yeah, this is what I mean. You can go under my video, and the part that he skips is the one in which I deal with the differences in how men and women experience homelessness. Women are... I think it was like 1 woman out of 3, 1 homeless woman out of 3 will be sexually assaulted out in the streets, compared to, I think, 1 man in 10. It's not even close to being the same experience. I also showed in my data that 90% of homeless people with children are women. 90%. So if 90% of homeless people with children are women, then that just means the resources are attributed to not just to the woman, but to the children. It's also prioritizing the children. The fact that men can sleep in the streets without as much fear of being assaulted is the proof of the opposite of what Trevor is claiming. Exactly. I slept on a park bench. Like years ago, when I was working in the TV industry, I finished at like 3 in the morning, and I was downtown. And I was waiting for my bus, but the next bus wasn't coming until a full hour. So I went in the park just around the corner, and I slept, and I took a nap on a park bench because I was tired. I was 20 at the time, maybe. And when I told that story to my girlfriend, she looks at me like I am psychotic. Like, how would I put myself out there like that? She didn't understand it at all. And I was just like, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean? Like, I was just there for like an hour and then I took the bus. Had a woman been doing that, it could have gotten so much more dangerous, obviously.
So again, why would you tell such an obvious falsehood that people can look on the screen and see is false, right?
It's an indicator of systemic discrimination against men. The problem here is that if you look at why the disparity between homeless men and women is so large, you'll realize that even though men are more likely to experience homelessness, they don't have it the worst. All of the arguments brought up by Spetsnaz are...
Really? They don't have it the worst?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to bypass this because I've watched already, and he just gives this bullshit about women getting raped, which I don't believe.
Literally, as I'm about to show my arguments, yeah, I'm going to bypass that because I've seen it, and his studies that women get raped more are bullshit. And you have to give credit here. He could have just said the stats were boring. He could have pulled a Metatron here. I'm going to skip it because it's boring. No, it's not because it's boring. It's because I don't believe it. I don't believe it, therefore I have nothing to address. Case closed. Checkmate.
Also, dude, women have the ability to gain some money by trading their bodies, which homeless men can't.
You know, this is what we don't talk about, you know, like, you know, if you're a woman out in the street and you need to sell your body to afford food, you definitely have it better than homeless men. You know, you just have to open your legs, you know, close your eyes. The guy's gonna be done in a few minutes. At least you get to do that, right? Men can't. What an absolute... I'm trying not to be too performative here, but holy shit, what a disgusting, disconnected from reality. What a weirdo. Is that really the best argument you have? You know, oh, women, I don't believe women get more raped in the street, but I do believe they prostitute themselves, and that's something they get to do, unlike men. What a piece of shit. Like, what is wrong with this guy? God damn.
If homeless men could trade their sex with women for money, they would. You know.
Oh, okay, so first of all, there are male sex workers, but if we're talking specifically about homeless men getting to prostitute themselves, first of all, I'm pretty sure it still happens, though they might actually be selling their bodies to other men, which isn't great. You know? Are we really romanticizing SA by economic coercion as the super cool privilege women have? Yeah, apparently we are. I can imagine this guy talking to a woman and saying, at least you can sell yourself. Yeah, he did not get wise with age. Oh my god. This is crazy.
Heartbeat. So I'm getting past those lies. Men crying. Let's hear this.
That's enough about Spetsnaz. I think you get the gist. So let's move on to Barbarossa. In terms of format, it's pretty much the same. No sources, no data, just talking into a mic. But
well, you don't provide any sources, dude. So who are you to speak?
The videos are responded to by order of appearance, so all the videos that I talk about, the links are right here. And sources and references, you click here. Do you want me to send you the link in your own comment section, my guy? I cited everything in order of appearance by the topics that I'm talking about. Like even the death of Austin Hemmings, like here. When I was looking into the murder. Now you can look into it yourself. It's right here. Oh, actually, whoa. Did they actually? They put a paywall behind it now. That's great. Okay, well, maybe you can't anymore. But I had the source, and I read it right here. I think it was a podcast or something. But it's right here. You should do that, to be honest, but you will likely delete your comment. Well, it's not like I care enough. Like, all the guy had to do is just click more. You know, he keeps getting my name wrong. Maybe look at it a little more, and then click to see, like, what's here. Because it is, like, all here. I'm just saying, like... You've never seen someone so confident saying something so demonstrably false. The comment will likely be deleted automatically. YouTube hates links with a passion. Yeah, there is that. But it doesn't matter. The links are right there. You don't get to tell me, like, oh, you don't cite anything. Like, first of all, I keep showing the screenshots, which is already more by itself than what Spetsnaz, Barbarossa, and Ape. What's his name? Ape? Sleeping Ape? I forgot his name. Thinking Ape. There you go. None of these guys show any sources. They don't have any pictures on screen. Well, sometimes they do, but like it's so out of context. It doesn't substantiate anything. And then you go into the comments and they don't link anything. Like having to look into those videos, I had to do a lot of research by myself just to see what they were talking about. I effectively did my own research and then I'm sharing that. And the guy is just like, well, you don't show any sources. And they're right there. So, you know. Brings up different topics related to MGTOW, so it's worth going over. The first video is called Our Hypocritical Attitudes Towards Men Crying, and it's pretty self-explanatory. And to be clear, men struggling to express emotional vulnerability is a real issue. But once again, because we're in MGTOW territory, we can't really get to the root of the issue. Listening to this video...
No, the root of the issue is easy. I'm not MGTOW, I can get to it easy. People do not like to see a man cry. It makes them disgusted.
Okay, why is that? Why is it that it's okay for a woman to cry and it's not okay for a man to cry? Is that biological? Or is there some kind of social structure here? That's what I'm talking about. Okay, hold up guys, the family came back. I'm just gonna check real quick. Okay, the teenager is gonna be with us for a while. He has no idea what's going on though, he's probably just gonna watch TV.
Both genders, that's women especially. Women want to puke when they see a man crying.
Barbarossa is making a lot of assumptions and approaching the topic from rather strange angles that I don't think serve the topic very well, assuming he interprets those examples correctly. The first example...
Strange angles, right? Right. So he can't call him wrong, so he says this weird thing like strange angles, right?
example he uses is an anecdote of a friend of his who expressed feeling less compassion towards his boy crying than his newborn girl, essentially expecting his son to be less emotional than his daughter, and how from Bar's perspective, it seems like a part of socialization as it occurs today. Men don't cry was what Bar's friend was taught, and he's passing this notion on to his son without realizing it. And that makes sense to me. But then Barbarossa goes,
How can it make sense to you if it's false?
No. What's making sense to me is Barbarossa's understanding of the situation. That his friend is less sympathetic to his infant son because that's what he grew up with himself, and he's passing that on. It's kind of part of the broader point that I'm trying to make here, which is that patriarchy is enforced through multiple generations. It's kind of just how people are brought up and then how they raise their children. That's what makes sense. The interpretation of Barbarossa of what is happening makes sense to me. Wanted to say it is still a cultural pressure for a man to not show emotion. I still can't show intimacy because of my upbringing. Exactly, that's what I'm talking about, Goder. And, this is something that we go through as men. And this is something that I'm trying to talk about in that video in a part that he also ends up skipping. The problem is that, the patriarchy, what it defines for men and what it defines for women also means that the expectations that men have of themselves or also by extent expectations that women have of men. So while men are taught that they shouldn't be emotional, women are also taught that men should not be emotional. And that means that if a man is emotional, he may receive the same negative reaction from his male peers as well as his female peers, because they both have the same understanding of what men are supposed to be. That's what makes it even more difficult, because it means that it's then enforced from both sides. Both people are brought up into this, and both people bring it onto their children and the rest of their environment. Brings up other examples, like the scene from The Walking Dead where Rick breaks down crying, and how a lot of people online made fun of the scene by making memes of it, indicating...
Yeah, that's something that's easily checked out to see if it's...
I will say about the meme of Rick crying, I do remember, because I was watching the show at the time when it came out, and yeah, a lot of people saw this scene and kind of laughed, but I don't think it was because lol, Rick is crying. I think the crying just came off kind of awkward, and it kind of felt like bad acting that makes you laugh. I think that was the main impression that people were getting from this show, not so much that he's just crying. But even so, that perspective has changed significantly since then, because you go back to watch that scene on YouTube, and what you'll find likely is people who are actually talking about how heartbreaking the scene is, and Rick breaking down like that, because for those who don't know, spoiler alert, in this scene, Rick's wife died giving birth to their new girl. That's his son. And his son has to put down his mom after she gave birth because she was about to turn into a zombie. So it's a very traumatic scene. It's very painful. It's very raw. And even then, there's also a lot of media illiteracy issue on the part of Barbarossa, because Barbarossa describes the reaction of the rest of the group in that scene as awkward. As in, they see Rick crying and they become very uncomfortable because he's supposed to be strong. It's no. They're all feeling the same pain. Laurie was part of the group since the beginning. They all knew her. There's issues with between Laurie and Rick, obviously, but that's not issues that she had with the rest of the group. They all just went through that trauma. They all lost a bunch of people in that episode. And they're all just completely distraught. It has nothing to do with Rick merely crying. Anyway, I'm just nerding out on The Walking Dead. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Sure not. So this is people's attitudes towards men breaking down. That's true.
It is.
It's an observable reality.
It is, and it's sad, and there's a problem you can identify, and that means you can solve it.
Does he need, a paper, stats on that, right? Does he need a study for that? Oh, by the way, guys, and you too, duke it out. Let's see. Here it is. This is a video of mine saying, boys don't cry. Studies suggest mothers, not fathers, show gender bias towards sons.
Yes, and that's literally what I was just talking about. Again, this is something I bring up in the video, and because I know he's gonna skip it, I'm having to explain it right now. But you can even see hold up. You can see mothers enforce gender roles onto their sons. What this means is that mothers are enforcing onto their sons their conception of what it means to be a man, the same way that fathers are. It's just that because the mothers are more directly involved into the upbringing of children, that means they take a more active part in doing that. Exactly. So women can have biases? No, women have the same biases. That's what I'm talking about. Women have the same understanding that men are supposed to be stoic, so they enforce that same belief onto their sons. And then they have the same belief that women should be vulnerable and more emotional and more emotionally open, I guess. And then they enforce that with their own daughters. And it doesn't take away from the fact here that what he's describing here is what Barbarossa was also talking about in his video. What Barbarossa was talking about was his male friend doing that to his young son is effectively the same thing you see right now. It's just that in that story, it was the father doing it, and it turns out that if you look at the studies, often it's the mothers. But it just means that everyone is part of the same patriarchal structure still. If anything, if it was a matriarchal society, as this guy really wants to make it out to be, if it was a matriarchal society, you would see a study that shows that mothers are turning men weak or something. It would be the exact opposite. You know, they would be the one who completely control the upbringing of children. But that's what I mean. So that doesn't disprove my point. If anything, it reinforces my point. It shows that the patriarchy is very much in every part of life.
Right. A study suggests that. So when you argue that there's no studies on something, well, when you look for studies and you find a real one, not a feminist drummed up one, they end up what? Showing what we already know.
Being that people still see men crying as something cringe and embarrassing. He then brings up an event called tear-seeking in Japan, where men get together to cry, usually as a way to process their stressful lives, although I could not find much information on it. He then brings up other valuable points, like the notion that men holding up their emotions is actually causing health problems over time, which is absolutely true. There's actually a lot of true stuff in that video. He also includes an example with Jaden Smith at one point challenging social norms by dressing differently, and making a point about the social construct of masculinity and how it defines how men should dress and behave.
But again, these constructs that you're talking about, right? Where are they? They're set up by the mothers, by the women in society. Mm-hmm. Women decide.
It's both. What you're talking about specifically is mothers in the context of parents raising their kids. But it's still both, and it's still society at large. Again, it doesn't take away from anything I say. It's complementary to my point.
What a masculine man is.
Women are raised to also believe that men are supposed to be stoic. So if you're a man and you learn that about men, and you pass that on to your son, and if you're a woman who learned that from your father and are passing that now to your son, it's the same thing. It's the same principle. And again, like Lucas says, like surely if it was a matriarchy, then masculine ideals like stoicism wouldn't be held in high regard. Exactly. If it was a matriarchy and women were against pushing all of these things, then and they were in control and they were the ones like exclusively like brainwashing the next generation, you wouldn't see these problems perpetuate.
But do go on.
Thank you. It's all correct in my opinion, but throughout the entire video, we end up with the same problem that Spetsnaz had, which is that there is indeed a problem, but Barbarossa can't call it what it is, and as such, can't fundamentally solve it.
I can call it what it is. It's male hostility. Both men and women are hostile to men. And
what is that based on, again? Okay, say that's what it is. Where is that hostility coming from? Is it biological, or is it social?
Women are the ones who decide what masculinity is.
Not really, no. Women and men learn the same things, and then they both pass them on.
I've called it out.
Say it with me. The problem is toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity does not mean that men are inherently toxic. It means...
But it does mean that the toxic part is decided by women, not men.
Even if I was to give you that, the point remains the same. That toxic masculinity is bad, and that's what's causing this. So you get rid of toxic masculinity, you get rid of this cultural taboo of men being emotional, of men being vulnerable. That some societal expectations of masculinity are toxic, and that they are not healthy, they are poisonous. And that's what Barbarossa is circling around for the entire 40 minutes of the video.
Well, I'm not circling around anything, right?
I'm not talking about you, man. I'm talking about Barbarossa. You're saying you don't circle about anything. Yeah, I'm happy for you. I wasn't talking about you. Why are you making it about you? I know you're the one watching it, but it wasn't about you. The entire 40 minutes of the video.
Well, I'm not circling around anything, right? I'm not doing that. First of all, I'm going to tell you something too. Duke it out.
Please.
Masculinity that doesn't exist.
What?
Something too. duke it out. Masculinity doesn't exist.
Masculinity doesn't exist. You're saying masculinity doesn't exist? The concept of masculinity does not exist. Well, it doesn't exist in the concept of social masculinity doesn't exist in the biological sense. It's social, sure. I can agree with that.
Because if it existed, then it would have a set definition that doesn't change.
What?
And exist. First of all, I'm going to tell you something too, duke it out. Masculinity doesn't exist. Because if it existed, then it would have a set definition that doesn't change. But it does change. It changes on the whims of women. Where did I find that? It changes on the whims of women.
Can we please substantiate this a little more, please? Like, what are you saying, man? What are you saying? Okay, so masculinity does not exist because if it did, it would be a definition that never changes. What is that based on? When I think of like masculinity as a social construct, I don't think of it as a fixed definition. What it means to be masculine socially has changed over time, over places and cultures. There are places where men wear skirts, like the kilt. The kilt in Scotland, that would be considered a skirt anywhere else, and that could be considered girly, but it's genderless in Scotland. There's this example that I really like. Is there a like higher quality picture here? That'd be nice. I was looking for that pic. There it is. Now look at this. This used to be considered manly. Guy is wearing heels and stockings and a wig and makeup. This was the king. This was as alpha male as you could get in the 1700s. No one who would dress like this today would be considered manly, but it was super manly back then. That was like the man, you know? It was the king. Of course it changes over time. Are you telling me that King Louis dressed like this because his mom at the time made him dress like this? The queen before him? The queen regent? My god. I don't really have any counter-argument. Like, I don't feel the need to, like, substantiate it more than that. Like, if your only argument is that masculinity isn't real because it doesn't change, that's not true. And if you say, but it does change because mothers make it change, that's still extremely overly simplistic at best.
Right. So, do we go any further? No. I've made my point there. What's the next one?
Yeah, let's try and better understand what toxic masculinity is. Let's not think about what causes it, you know, how to solve it, because this is one of my broader arguments in this video as well. Like, Barbarossa is talking about a real problem. Men struggling to show emotions. That's a real problem. But what is Barbarossa's solution? Barbarossa's solution is the MGTOW solution. Just isolate yourself. You can't be judged if you isolate yourself. And I'm saying, maybe we can do better than that. But let's skip it, you know.
Here we go.
All of it. I was recommended a second video by this YouTuber called Circumcision, and I was curious enough, but I will say it comes off as a more concrete example of MGTOW men being weird and somewhat unhinged.
So, men being against harming little boys' sexuality is unhinged?
No, that's not what I said. I said that he comes off unhinged in the video. I'm not talking about the topic itself, but you know, it's just one of the many things you just misunderstand. But no, I'm talking about how Barbarossa comes off unhinged as he approaches the topic. Circumcision by itself, like, yeah, that's a totally fair topic.
So your idea of sanity is harming helpless babies?
No, I did not say that either. I don't know where you're getting that from.
That doesn't say much for your character, Duke.
Well, it doesn't say much for my character because it's nothing I said, so of course it says nothing about my character.
No.
So, there is a lot of debate around circumcision, right? Like, should it be allowed? Should it even be normalized? And broadly speaking, I tend to side with Bar here. I don't think circumcision should be done unless it's medically necessary, and a good chunk of circumcisions come from religion. Just to be clear, that's my take right there. I just said it, you know? I don't think we should just have mandatory circumcision. I don't think we should just be circumcising babies. I think if it's a necessary medical procedure, then you do it. That's my position. Unless it's medically necessary. And a good chunk of circumcisions come from religion, like Judaism and Islam.
No, dude. No, they don't. Gentiles adopted circumcision from the Jewish community, or the Jewish religion, not for religious purposes, but in an effort to prevent masturbation. Masturbation in boys, not girls. The historical practice of male circumcision in Western countries, particularly during the Victoria era, was significantly influenced by the belief that it could prevent masturbation. Right?
I mean, I'll be the first to say it. Like, until he said that, like, I didn't actually know about that. Like, it's interesting. What does it have to do with circumcision today, though? Okay, that's something that was done back then in Western countries in the Victorian era, and it was done for that belief. Is that still the case today? Because if it's not the case today, then it doesn't really matter for the argument that you're making today. If my argument today is that circumcision should be something that's done as a medical procedure when it's necessary, my argument has nothing to do with that. It doesn't. And it's really stupid. But women get cut down there too, so what's the point? Yeah, that's something else that happens, you know, FGM. It's pretty rare these days. Like, I think like there's a few places in Africa maybe that they still do it. I can't speak for the circumcised because I'm not, but I don't think it prevented what they were trying to prevent with it. You know, it was a very dumb belief. But you know what the funniest thing is? I mean, since this stream is getting ridiculously long as it is, I'm not going to do the research on it because I don't know how that's going to go with YouTube, but do you guys know that in that same period, the Victorian era, women used to be diagnosed with hysteria? They would get a bit irrational, they would be a little jumpy, and doctors found that they could treat their hysteria with a pelvic massage. That's real. There's a movie on it. I saw it a couple of years ago. It's insane. In the same time period that they were presumably circumcising boys to prevent them from masturbating, they also treated women who were aroused for hysteria because they could not possibly believe that women could have those feelings. Those were feelings for men. So they started giving them pelvic massages. And then you know what happened? You know, the woman, they started really liking those treatments, you know, because they weren't getting anything like that at home because it was never heard of, right? And the doctors who were doing these procedures, you know, they get tired, you know, it's a lot of hand movement. So they invented a device that would vibrate to do that work for them. And if you know the object that I'm talking about here, know that this is basically how this modern invention was invented for treating hysteria for women in the 1800s. You can absolutely look it up. This was happening at the same time as what he's describing. Funnily enough, the word hysteria itself comes from the Greek word for uterus, which is hysteria. Okay, well, thank you, Taname, for always being the assistant historian and bringing up all the facts that I wouldn't know about. But this was happening at the same time as what he's describing, and what it shows is that sexuality was just very taboo and not well understood at all in this specific time period. You know, what they were trying to do with circumcision clearly did not help because people who are circumcised can still masturbate, like that's not an issue. And, you know, in spite of not thinking women could feel like that, they absolutely could, and they were treating it as a medical treatment. It's an interesting anecdote that he brings up because I didn't know about it, but like, let's not pretend that this was woman doing this. It was still the patriarchy, and the patriarchy was just really weird.
It's an attack on male sexuality. It's a disgust of male sexuality, your sexuality.
It's a disgust of sexuality, period. Woman's own arousal was treated as a medical condition. What is that if not like a complete disregard for sexuality?
You're a guy, and so people find your sexuality disgusting. The thought of a boy pleasuring himself is so disgusting to people that they cut him.
100 to 200 years ago they did, not today, man. This is why I'm asking you to make an argument for today. Like, come on, it's an interesting anecdote of the past, but you can use that as an argument today for why children are getting circumcised.
With the idea that he'll have no sensation there, and his member will be strictly a function of baby making, but no pleasure for him.
And what was the function of woman? Again, they couldn't possibly think of women as people who could receive pleasure. Like, it's 2025, not 1825. Exactly. Like, that's the whole point.
So your idea that it's religious, it's just false.
Well, to be clear, like, and since we're on the topic, and since he's going to talk about it a lot, like, yeah, like I was approaching the topic of circumcision like very laid back. Okay, like I know what it is, and I know it's being done, and it's true that, like, you know, like I kind of thought of it of like, you know, like something that gets done by default, regardless, like medical issues aside, like in religion it gets done a lot, and that's it. But what I think also happens a lot, and that seems to be like the primary factor behind like a lot of infants being circumcised today, it's that a lot of doctors are just strongly recommending it to parents when their babies are born as a way of just preventing further problems. You know, that's in terms of like why it's being done, that's the primary reason. And you know, that's all it is. And like my position there would be that, well, maybe you don't need to operate. Maybe there's just some habits you can take to make sure that whatever could happen as a result of keeping the foreskin, that it's not an issue. But again, the real issue here, and what I'm talking about Barbarossa specifically being unhinged, is because of of Barbarossa's explanation for why circumcision is prevalent, which is insane. It is. I don't think those are moral, especially if they are done on children and infants who cannot consent. But those are usually the main reasons for circumcision: religious tradition, medical necessity.
Well, how come they don't allow circumcision for grown women then, who can consent? It's outlawed.
Those are usually the main reasons for circumcision: religious tradition, medical necessity.
Well, how come they don't allow circumcision for grown women then, who can consent? It's outlawed.
I just spoke about medical necessity. Is there any medical necessity for circumcising women? Not that I know of. It's actually pretty messed up, like the alternative. Like I said, if it's medically necessary, do it. And I would say the same thing. I can't fathom a scenario where it would be medically necessary for a woman. But if it was and that's what they need to do, then do it. You know? Yeah, I don't think I have a double standard here at all.
Right? Because people don't mind the idea of a woman rubbing one out.
Or medical prevention. Barbarossa, however, has a very interesting take.
When we circumcise young boys or infant boys, what are we doing to them? We are surgically mutilating their genitals, and we are assuming that one day, you know, perhaps 14 or 15 years into the future, they will be appreciative of the fact that their parents did so when the boy starts taking an interest in women sexually. That's why we really do it. It's for female aesthetic preference.
Exactly. Female is aesthetic pleasure.
And that's completely insane. Understand what was just being said. They just argued that the main reason, the primary driving factor of children, of infants, of newborn babies being circumcised is that the parents are doing it because they know that women prefer circumcised penises. And so they're like, well, we're going to do it for infants so that when he gets sexually active, like 20 years down the line, his partners are going to be happy about that. That's their explanation. Where does that came from? This is what I mean. It's unhinged. It's not unhinged to be against circumcision. It's unhinged to believe that that's the reason it happens.
Exactly. Right? Let's see if I can't find something that backs that up there. Well, look at here. A majority of women express a preference for circumcised male partners.
Okay, but once again, you've entered a prompt that leads you directly to this. A more neutral prompt would have been something like, do women have a preference for circumcised penises? That could have been more neutral, and that'll give you a more balanced results. That said, like I go into it in my video and he ends up skipping it. Let's just keep going.
Right. And they include factors such as appearance.
Yes, appearance is one of them. But is it the main one? And to be clear, this is showing women's preferences, and part of the reason is appearance, but also a big part of that is hygiene and reduced risk of infections. So it's not just appearance, it's also hygiene, it's also the reduction of sexually transmitted disease, and it still does not make a link here between women's preferences and the choice to have newborns circumcised. It still doesn't draw a link here. That link still isn't there. That link is still completely made up.
There you go. And perceived sexual pleasure. Right. So what Barbarossa just claimed here is easily proven true.
No, what is proven true is that women on average may have a preference, but it does not prove that that's the reason the procedure is done on babies. That part is unhinged.
We assume that boys will consent to it because in the future, 15, 20 years down the road, both, I guess, most women and I don't know what percentage of gay men prefer this, right? And we do this automatically, and we just assume that they'll be okay with this because they're boys. And boys don't really care what's done to them as long as it's done in the name of getting themselves laid, essentially. That's the attitude that we have.
Well, there you have it. Circumcision is actually a form of male oppression because it's being primarily done to be aesthetically pleasing to women.
Which is obviously true.
No, it's not. Any sources? Nope.
Why would you? Women have actually claimed or told us to our faces that that's what their preferences are.
They prefer it. That doesn't mean that's why they're doing it to infants. It's not the same thing. Like, how many times is he going to make that conflation? Well, forever, I guess.
Where are your sources to counteract it?
That's a very good question. Are we going to get to the source, though?
Dude, where are yours?
And just as Gottlieb says, I doubt that cultures that still do those cuts will let women decide if boys get cut. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, keep in mind that throughout all of this, you're still living in patriarchal societies where women don't really get to make much decisions. The idea that women who have no power, no legislative power, no cultural power, are the ones who get to decide that one specific thing on the fate of the men in their society, still completely false. I'm confused whether he is implying the parents think this or that this is the medical attitude. I couldn't see a parent thinking that, and why would a doctor ever advise that or think that? That's what I mean. He thinks that because women have a preference for this, that's the reason doctors and parents make the procedure. That they're directly linked. It's not. The driving factor for circumcision in infants is either religious beliefs or medical prevention. And it's probably more medical prevention because, like, depending on where you are in the world, the religions that do practice this are probably a demographical minority. So it's all medical prevention, medical necessity. It has nothing to do with, like, well, we should do it as a favor for our son's girlfriend in, like, 20 years. No one does this. It's one of the most insane claims that I've ever heard from the manosphere. It's in the S tier.
Now, notice this guy, he has no sources.
Again, my sources are in the description.
To support any claim he makes. So, who are you, duke it out?
My sources are in the description.
To demand sources from somebody else.
And then I make my own survey. I guess that's just what it is.
It is?
Honestly, this is such a weird claim to make. How far do you...
So, truth is weird. See?
I can't get
See, what would be sane, what would be normal, is the lies.
You have to dig to pretend like this is a real men's issue. I'm sure we can do something.
So, our sexuality being damaged isn't a real men's issue?
Well, no, it's not a real men's issue to the extent that, like, it's not being done for what you think it's being done. In that sense, it is not an issue at all.
You're essentially saying that men have no issues then, dude.
I'm saying that that's not the issue. The issue you're pointing out is not real. There is an issue with circumcision. Maybe it's too prevalent. Maybe religions shouldn't be able to do it. It's not an issue of doing it for women, and it's not being done by women for the sake of women in the next generation. That does not happen. About religion, but to suggest that parents are doing it solely with the idea that when their kids grow older, their future girlfriend will appreciate it, that's insane. He doesn't...
No. If that's insane, then insanity is what reality is. The truth is insane. So...
No, it is insane because it's not the truth. My God.
Your idea...
Talk about, like, he's the one who says, like, that I'm buying into my own propaganda. Have you ever seen someone so sold on their worldview than that? Damn.
The idea of sanity is the lie you're pushing. It's done for two reasons, mainly. Actually, I'm going to put a third. The first one, of course, is female preference. Second one is disgust at male sexuality. They don't want to have boys masturbating.
That argument you made was from 200 years ago. Are you suggesting that it's still the case today? That they're still doing it today, even though it's not the Victorian era anymore? Someone else said, yeah, I think Trevor is from the Victorian era, that somehow time traveled. You might be right here. He's still bringing it up as if it's still happening today. That makes no sense.
And the third one is actually fathers who were cut themselves, saying, if I was cut, then my son's going to be cut. It's hostility towards his own son.
And again, like, there's no acknowledgement here of religious tradition, and there is no acknowledgement of medical prevention. Like, that does not fit anywhere at all in that guy's mind. I don't have any data to back that up. It's just dumb.
No, dude, I showed you the preferences. I guess the AI could have been lying. Right?
Preference and reason for circumcision are not the same thing.
Where's yours? Right?
That said, while I was looking into this, I did find some data that suggested that women do indeed have an aesthetic preference for circumcised penises, and I was curious enough about it to try my own survey. So if you're curious too, stick around.
No, I'm not curious, dude. I'm bypassing that.
Okay, okay. So of course he's bypassing it. Now the reason I do mention that afterwards is that like I was like, okay, like is there like an actual preference? Again, it doesn't give me any explanation for why circumcision is being done. It's just telling me that women have certain preferences. But when I was Googling it myself, because I wasn't entering prompts that were so strongly leaning me into a specific decision, the data I was seeing was all over the place. Some of them said that women preferred, some said they didn't. It was a bit all over the place, so as part of the video I decided to kind of like do my own entertainment here, and I decided to have a survey of my own. And what I'm showing here is a Facebook group, which I blurred because I'm not really, didn't want to risk like issues with the admins of the group or something. But that's a Facebook group that I follow that is exclusively adults that like to talk about, you know, all of that stuff. It's very open, it's very honest, and I've been on that group for a couple of years. I don't really interact with it much, but every now and then, like, it's nice to go see, like, what people are talking about and whatever. And the point of that group is that everyone who's on it, they're very positive, they're very honest, they're very open-minded. So I was like, what better place to ask women what their actual preferences are? And through my own survey on that group, I found that close to 50% of women actually prefer non-circumcised, for reasons like preferring it because it looks better, because it's actually more fun to handle. Like they straight up said like, oh, you know, like that's the reason I like it. There were some women, but I think it was like 1 out of 4 that said they preferred circumcised. And yeah, it was like 1 woman out of 4 that actually said like, yeah, I prefer it circumcised. And they would cite hygiene as the primary reason. You know, that was my own survey, and it kind of showed me that like actually like if you ask women who are very active or very open to discussing these things without filters, without judgments, then that was an interesting survey to have.
So you said it was insane, and then you found out it was true. Right.
Again, you're conflating preferences with the reason for circumcision.
And what's this one?
There were a lot of MGTOW men that said, you know, that divorce favors women, that marriage incentivizes women to divorce, with some people even saying that when I get there myself, I will better understand MGTOW. So that will be the last main segment for this video. Is marriage unfair to men?
That's a rhetorical question. It's 100% yes, of course. Women are rarely ever forced to pay child support or alimony. Rarely.
Yeah, it's because they have sole custody. You don't pay money to yourself if you have sole custody. They do have sole custody the majority of the time.
And actually, a lot of men suffer estrangement from their family by women. These are just cold, hard facts.
Not so much. And the answer is, kind of, but it really depends on...
No, the answer is yes.
How you interpret the data. For example...
Well, you would have to use a different interpretation in order to make truth false.
No, you would need to interpret the data correctly.
And falsehood truth. I don't have to do that.
The vast majority of divorces lead to the mother having full custody of the kids. That is...
There you go. So you're proving their point.
But... True. But is that an example of divorce courts favoring women? Well...
Yes.
Now hold on.
If you don't see that, look, if it was...
We're almost there, man. We're almost there. Keep it up. We're almost there.
If the genders were reversed, you'd be saying definitely yes. So come on, dude. I'm going to look ahead. No, I'm not going to give this guy any. He's just going to tell a lie. Period. Practical advice for young men. And he shows, who is that male feminist? I can't remember the name from the Daily Show. Right.
From last week tonight.
You have no practical advice for...
Okay, so since he's going to skip it, we might as well finish this with like the one final thing that he just purposefully skips. So here's my video. There were a lot of MGTOW men that said, you know, that divorce favors women. Oh, you interpret the data. For example, the vast majority of divorces lead to the mother having full custody of the kids. That is true. But is that an example of divorce courts favoring women? Okay, so that's where he cuts and then skips. So what's next? Well, no, because roughly 91% of custody issues are solved by both parents without ever involving the courts or lawyers. Meaning 91% of custody issues are settled by the parents amicably. That means if 80% of women have sole custody, that's because 91% of the time, the father just says, yeah, you can have him. And that ends the discussion right there. That's like It was right there and he immediately skipped it. I wonder why. You know, if it was just a lie, he could have just shown it and said it's a lie, but, you know, maybe it's not a lie and he's just saying that so he doesn't have to address it. What else does it say? I don't remember. That in the majority of cases where the mother gets full custody, the father willingly grants it and in turn agrees to pay child support. Understand, this is done willingly by the father in the majority of the cases. So the idea that men are oppressed when they're making the decision themselves is absurd. It's also worth pointing out that even through mutually agreed custody, the rate of sole custody for mothers is going down, while joint custody has been going up for a while, meaning that while fathers did not used to want to raise their own children, they are gradually wanting to, and usually get to an agreement with the mother without going to court at all. Only about 4% of custody cases ever go to trial, at which point the mother tends to win most of the time. And that's what you need to understand. Like when it comes to resolving these issues, it only involves the court 4% of the time. When the manosphere complains about judges favoring the mothers in the courts, that only accounts for 4% of all custody issues. In 4% of the cases, it's a judge that decides. 91% of the time, they just decide mutually without the need to involve lawyers or anyone else. This is what the manosphere constantly ignores. So when they say like, oh, you know, the unfairness of divorce, like, again, I go into a lot more than that, like in that section. There's a lot more I go into, like what is the leading cause of divorce and how men can actually prevent divorce and even increase their chances of getting shared custody or even sole custody. That was that video by CityCrusher, currently standing at 1100 views. Like I said, it's a relatively small channel. If I keep posting to on my own channel, I will be trumping this guy extremely fast. Like 2,000 subscribers in over a decade, making 900 videos. This guy is going nowhere. But anyway, yeah, that was fun. We definitely took way longer. Not really, like I always end up taking too long. But yeah, that was the guy. And I think we can safely conclude that this guy is not in a position to be making the argument he's making. Very arrogant, while purposefully misinterpreting what I'm saying, purposefully skipping the arguments. So that's all there is to it. Like I said, I would have been happy to talk to him, but once he made it clear that no matter what we say, he would never believe any of my data because I'm from a hate group, and then he can never believe anything I say, then it makes it pretty clear that like this, what I'm doing right now, what I did, it's basically as constructive as it gets, because if I was talking to him, I don't think we would get anywhere. If he still wants to debate, I mean, he can tell me in the comments of this video, I guess. So yeah, anyway, like I'm still dragging on too much, so let's get it here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Also check out my main gaming channel. I do some live streams and some content there too. Thank you!